As you can see, Christmas has come. It's kind of exciting. This week, Jameer came to me and said, Pastor Chuck, are we going to do it again this year? I'm going, oh yeah, bigger and better. Toughest thing for me is remember these kids' names. You know, Kevin. Kevin is an easy name to remember. But Jaquil and Jameer, you know, it's just like, they're not names that guys like me use every single day. And if I don't use a name like 15 times in a week, I look at you and go, Ruth, right? Yeah, I'm just, you know, it's, anyway.
The guy with the face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little Mr. Anthony Cooper. I hope he comes this year. Anthony's about to get big. Scrawny little kid. Hugs me every time I go. Talking about Mr. Rogers today, the effect that it has on your life of doing ministry. We pulled in to the parking lot, and our windows were down because I have to talk to the security people and that type of thing. And I hear my name being called out in the distance from all different directions on the playgrounds. It's Pastor John! I'm Pastor John! You wonder why I do what I do. Just, you know. Title of today's message is, Would You Be My Neighbor? I tried to find a red cardigan. And did you know that most of his sweaters were made by his mom, and when his mom passed away, the staff would order mail carriers' cardigans and dye them colorful colors. I have no idea how to get one of those, you know, other than robbing a mailman. You know?
Didn't say it was a good idea.
Couldn't even find blue Keds anywhere. It was just, anyway. You know, it's not a coincidence that his movie is coming out this week and we're ending our study on Isaiah 61. More so than most people, he's the living example of living out this passage in his life. And because he's been gone for 16 years, we can look back at his life, at the footprint of his life, and draw from it principles that can empower us. Now, I'm going to be really honest here. I didn't grow up watching Mr. Rogers. I didn't grow up watching Sesame Street. Sesame Street did not come on until I was in high school. Mr. Rogers did not become nationally known until I was in middle school, older elementary school. My impression was Pixan and Captain Kangaroo. If you don't know what those are, do some research. Just saying. The one episode that stands out of all the episodes that Mr. Rogers' show did was the one with the kiddie pool. Do you remember the episode with the kiddie pool? It was in 1969, the height of the Civil Rights Movement. He had a little blow-up kiddie pool on the set, and he was talking like it was a really hot day, and he rolled his pant legs up and took his Keds off and his socks off, and he was wiggling his toes in the little kiddie pool. And the policeman, Officer Clemens, came by to say hello. And Fred Rogers starts having the conversation with Officer Clemens and how, you know, you're a police officer and you're on your feet all day and it's so hot out. Wouldn't it be nice to take your shoes off and soak them in a nice cool water of a little pool like the one I have here? So Officer Clemens does that. He takes his shoes and socks off, rolls up his pant legs, and puts his feet into the same little pool right beside Fred Rogers. The amazing thing was that Officer Clemens was black. And without saying anything about racism, about saying anything about the mores of society at the time that white people and black people could not swim together, Mr. Rogers made a statement. that shook the world. And it did. For those who don't know much about Fred Rogers, I did a little homework and I'm going to give you some background. He was raised in Latrobe, Pennsylvania to a very wealthy family where his father owned businesses, big businesses. He grew up privileged. He grew up as a music student. He went to college for music. Met his wife. They both loved children. He was an ordained Presbyterian minister. He was a strong conservative and a Republican. Now, you would never know that by you look at his life. But he was. I posted a Margaret Thatcher quote this week on Facebook that says, "A man who stands in the middle of the street gets attacked from both sides of the street." That was Fred Rogers to a T. He did stuff that provoked people. He went out to the middle of the street and talked about kindness. He went out to the middle of the street and talked about morals. Almost like a litmus test to society. And he was at times beat up on by liberals. A lot more times he was beat up on by conservatives, but he didn't care. When you look at Isaiah 61 and what we're going to look at today, Luke 4, so was Jesus. Jesus walked out into the middle of the street and did what he did. And I want you to be thinking about this today, because are you standing on the sidewalk or are you in the middle of the street? That's the big idea I want you to take away today. The mind-boggling thing is that to be able to do the work of the ministry, you have to be in the middle of the street. Now, there was a cool New York Times article about Fred Rogers this week. It described his office. Now, what you would imagine the most most beloved kids guy in the world, what was his office like? It was eclectic. It was a little bit of a warehouse. I feel so much better right there, you know? He had a big brown comfy couch and an easy chair. He did not have a desk. He did all his stuff and his writing sitting from his easy chair. He had a sandbox in the middle of his office and driftwood. The people would just give gifts and would just show up at his office and stay there for 15 years, you know. He said this to this interviewer back in the day when she was interviewing him. And he goes, "I want to tell you about my tie." Because, you know, he always wore a tie. He lifted it up and said, "Do you know what this tartan is?" Okay, Presbyterian, Scotsman, wearing a tartan tie. Not totally unusual. He goes, "This tartan is the clergy tartan." He says, "I suppose if you were Scottish you would recognize this, but I don't think people know that I wear this tie more than one or two people. Maybe you just feel like you know that it represents a big part of who I am. The muted lavender and light blue clergy tartan was traditionally only worn by people involved in ministry. Fred said it was a gift on his ordination day by his dear friend Bill Barker, one of his closest friends, when he was ordained in 1963. He says, and this is the charge that I got at that ordination. "We charge you to shake us through a God who involves himself in our world, into the world where he already is. This world of TV cameras, puppets, children, parents, of studios, of directors, of actors, and this too is God's world. We as the church charge you that you would speak to us to disturb us. We charge you to speak to us, to remind us too that through you we must be involved." He took from his ordination this mission to disturb the world. Think about that. That was Jesus' mission. Jesus shook the very foundations of the religious world. Why were the Sanhedrin and Pharisees were so ticked off with him all the time because he stood in the middle of the street and spoke truth. We can learn a lot from Fred Rogers. I never knew that about his tie until just 3 days ago. That his call was to disturb us. He had the simplistic method of bothering both liberals and conservatives by just being kind. My friend Jamie Regal, great evangelist, once said, "It's the responsibility of every evangelist to poke you with a stick." The Apostle Paul was an evangelist. Think about his writings, think about his actions, and how he stirred people up. You can't do that from the sidewalk behind the crowd. You can't do that hiding in the midst of people in a little grove of trees. You've got to get out into the middle of the street and play in traffic. You see, you and I are called as Christians to do hard things. To stand in the middle of the street and love people, serve people, point out glaring problems in this world, even the elephants in the room. Fred Rogers said that we should disturb people by our words and deeds. Now turn with me to Luke chapter 4. Jesus had just survived the temptation with Satan in the wilderness, and he went home. One day my technology will be so, spot on that I can push a button and it goes boop. I have to wait for it. In verse 14 of chapter 4, Jesus returned to Galilee, filled with the Holy Spirit's power. Reports about him spread quickly through the whole region. He taught regularly in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. When he came to the village of Nazareth, his boyhood home, he went as usual to the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood to read the scriptures. The scroll of Isaiah the prophet was handed to him, and he unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written. And he read this: "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives be released, and that the blind will see, and that the oppressed will be set free. And in the time of the Lord's favor has come." Rolled up the scroll, handed it back to the attendant, and sat down, and every eye in the synagogue was upon him intently. He began to speak to them. "The scripture you just heard has been fulfilled this very day." Everyone spoke well of him and was amazed by the gracious words that came from his lips. And they said, "How could this be?" they asked. "Isn't this Joseph's kid?" And then he said, "You will undoubtedly quote me this proverb, 'Physician, heal yourself,' meaning do miracles here in your hometown like you did in Capernaum. But I tell you the truth, no prophet is accepted in his hometown." Certainly, there were many needy widows in Israel in Elijah's time, and the heavens were closed for 3.5 years, and a severe famine devastated the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them. He was sent instead to a foreigner, a widow Zarephath, in the land of Sidon. And many in Israel had leprosy in the time of the prophet, but he only healed one, Naaman, a Syrian. When they heard this, the people in the synagogue were furious. Jumping up, they mobbed him and forced him to the edge of the hill that was built, in which the town was built. And they intended to push him over the cliff, but he passed right through the crowd and went on his way. He spoke truth, and it disturbed them. This is where it talks about where the story of the immigrant comes from. That passage. He was reminding us who we should minister to. The widow lady who was from a foreign country that had nothing. The person from Syria who was the absolute enemy that we were to heal. In Leviticus 19 it says, "You must not harbor hatred against your brother in your heart. Directly rebuke your neighbor so that you will not incur guilt on account of him. Do not seek revenge or bear grudge against them, any people, but love your neighbor as yourself. In verse 33, it says, when a foreigner resides with you in your land, you must not oppress him. You must treat the foreigner living among you as a native born and love him as yourself. For you were foreigners in the land of Egypt, and I am now your Lord your God. And you must not use dishonest measures of length, weight, or volume. In our Christmas series, we're going to look at the Prince of Peace, the Shalom. Give you a taste of what's to come. In Isaiah 58, it says, we acknowledge that together we can make our community and the world a place more fully manifest the shalom, the peace of God. As we seek to love God with all our being and love our neighbors as ourselves, we live our lives to do good works empowered and inspired by God. We can repair the brokenness of the past. We can become a movement of holiness in a fragmented world. We can become those whom Isaiah called repairers of the breach, restorers of the streets to live in. Did you know that Fred Rogers hated television?
Yes.
He did. Part of what made his enduring success was that he viewed the television show as his ministry, rather than as a platform for his message. I got into television because I so hated it, he once admitted. But after earning his divinity degree in 1962, he had realized that the medium would be a fabulous instrument to nurture those who would watch and listen. His producer, Marguerite Whitmer, explained in the documentary that was done a few years ago, Won't You Be My Neighbor, that Rogers' formula was to take all the elements that make good television and do the exact opposite. It's a powerful reminder that we as Christians, we are called to transform whatever industry we are in, rather than to simply conform to it. Joyce Millman wrote in 1999 that the show had been on for the air for almost 30 years, and Rogers had resisted merchandising and razzle-dazzle and fads, and although he did break dance once on the show, technologically flash reasoning that children's basic needs don't change through the decades, and that focus on things that transcended time to help the show become timeless. It's a critical lesson for us Christians to learn that we are called to mirror Christ in ministry. That's how Jesus wants us to live. Call this section Lessons from a Dead Man. Luke 10. Do you know where Luke 10 comes from? Someone challenged Jesus, a religious person, about how shall I inherit eternal life? And his answer was, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Again, Leviticus, Isaiah, there's a constant theme going on here. And the person challenged him and said, well, who's my neighbor? Arrogant so-and-so. And Jesus tells the story of the Samaritan. Did it ever occur to you that this story takes place in the middle of the street? That Jesus is pointing out this has been done, the harm has been done to this individual, and people were choosing to walk on either side to avoid this man. And that somebody who Jewish society would consider a dog had the compassion and love of God to go to minister to this individual. I call it Living in Plain View. There's a book, if you haven't read it, you need to get it. It's written by Coleman. It's called The Master Plan of Evangelism. It's 8 very basic steps. And it talks about how Jesus did his ministry. I read it for the first time 42 years ago. And I just about read it, I'm going to say, every other year for the last 42 years, just to remind myself of how Jesus did what he did. This is a very simplistic thing. I'm going to share with you a couple points in a minute. One thing I do dislike about the book, it's now like $12.95. When I bought it, it was $1.99. And they're selling the same paperback in the umpteenth edition now for like $9.99. And I'm like, anyway. How do we live in plain view? When we look at what the Samaritan did, you never back down from an opportunity to do good. Did you hear that? Never back down from an opportunity to do good. The world is watching. The world was watching the Samaritan. The world was watching Jesus. The world was watching Paul. The world was watching Fred Rogers. The worldview of Jesus Christ is colorblind. So should ours. The most segregated moment of the daily week in America is 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. Why is that? Why is it that we live in a community where we go around Chester? Look, I'm a native. I've been here all my life. I'm 61, almost 62 years old. And people forever, Chester's a dividing line. People from southern Delaware County don't cross Chester to go anywhere in northern Delaware County. I mean, eastern Delaware County. Eastern Delaware County people don't cross through Chester to go the west. That's why I really believe God put us right here on the very north end of Chester, because we're right betwixt the Gulf. We need to be colorblind. The kids that we minister during the week at the school are K through 5, K through 6 graders. They don't know color. They don't know discrimination. I watch them play with one another. They're friends. They're family. Brotherhood. I watch my sixth graders are now my helpers. And they're like a little brotherhood, You do what's necessary even when it means to go the extra mile. Say that again. You do what is necessary even when it means to go the extra mile. You cannot count the cost. You should count the cost, okay? Let me back that up. You should count the cost. No one goes to war without figuring out what he's going to need to win. But when it comes to actually doing what is necessary, you go the extra mile. Jesus once said, if they ask you for this and that, we'll give them your coat too. One of the things I've learned in recovery is that people matter. When you can't, and you don't have the capacity to do, and you're helpless, God gets a hold of your heart and shows you things. One of the things that blew me away with my recovery, I had gotten to my second hospital, and I was surrounded by constant praise. And, it was one of those hospitals that people were dying. People were crippled, people were in horrible conditions of a state of health. And the nursing staff were the most positive people I ever met. There was constant praise, constant encouragement. Even though I fell down the first time I tried this, the first time they tried to get me out of bed, I collapsed twice back onto the bed. But they praised me for being able to finally sit up the third time on my own. That became a reoccurring theme, and it occurred to me, why is it that so prevalent in healthcare but not in the church? Why do we talk about garbage at church? Why do we talk about politics at church, the most divisive thing? other than we were to buy the best cheesesteak, divisive things. We should be talking about divisive things. We should be fortifying each other, building each other up, looking for opportunities to encourage and praise people in their struggles as the little steps that they take for victory. We have to do what's necessary, even when it means to go the extra mile. Fourth thing is we've got to follow up. Because every situation opens a door for more opportunities. When you look at the Samaritan, he paid the innkeeper and said, my next time through, I'm going to be stopping. And if there's any other expenses occurred, I'll take care of it when I stop through the next time. He had a plan to follow up. Do we follow up? Oh, it's just a one-time thing. I marveled at some of the older folks who would, in my church experience, a young person would come in, or a person who was extremely broken would come in, and they would stay a while, and that they would be overcome by sin, and they would fall away. And people would be so hypercritical of that individual. And I started to ask myself, did they fall away because we didn't care enough to follow up with them, and to look in on them, and to help them? Or that, oh, they got saved, it's good, they're good, yet they had all these problems in their lives. Were we there for those people? See, this is all about discipleship and playing good. Tom Hanks said in an interview, when they asked him, what was the favorite part of the movie for you? And he said, there's this question Fred asked in the film, and he's asked it a number of different ways in public. And it's this: is there somebody who loved you into existence, who loved you so much that you would become who you are right now? Who taught us how to love? Who accepted us exactly as we are? Who told us that we mattered? And gave us a foundation of confidence and benevolence that we would not have unless they had been in our lives. There's a crossroads to good mentoring. Discipleship is mentoring. It's seizing the opportunity. I'm going to give you a few points that I live by. One, never do ministry alone. Every opportunity is a teachable moment. Learned that from Billy Graham. He never went anywhere alone. Anybody who was affected by Graham's ministry traveled with somebody. Or that when they were on the ground, they took someone with them. By the way, there's safety in that. Turn your dinner table into a team-building moment. Deuteronomy 6. Listen, Deuteronomy 6 said, what do? At the table, teach your kids. In this day and age, teach your grandparents. In this day and age, teach the younger people of faith. You see, there's a picture of the cross in all this. Above you is a mentor. There's somebody who's gone a little bit further than you have, somebody who's a little older, somebody who's a little wiser. In some cases, they were a little bit more broken than you are, and you have them to go to as a source. And then, I don't want to use the word beneath you, but coming up behind you is another person who's new to the faith, who's struggling. And because of what steps that you have taken, you are there to help them along. And then side to side, you have peers who have gone through what you are going through, who are working through the same things that you're working through. And this picture is of the cross in action, of God working in our lives. That if we are to seize hold of these opportunities, if we are to love our neighbor as ourselves, we have to realize and be cognizant of what's going on around us, that there is people that are more spiritually mature than us that are speaking into our lives. I have people, even though I've been doing this 42 years, that are speaking into my life on a weekly basis. And if I need it, I know you do. I also know that I can't do this alone. I have peers, I have people in ministry, people that have walked as long as I have, that I talk to on a weekly basis. That we encourage each other, we lift each other up. But then I have a whole squadron of young people that I seem to have a treasure trove of, that I'm constantly looking out after and speaking into. Who's your neighbor? Are you standing in the street, or are you a bystander? You are gonna get hit. Oh, yes, you will. People are gonna challenge you. People are gonna say mean things to you. Occasionally, they actually do follow through with sticks and stones. You know? As we leave this series, what has Isaiah taught you? Foreigner, a stranger, a broken person. Step out of the crowd, become involved. Watch what God does. Let's pray. Lord, may I be more like Fred Rogers. Lord, may I disturb people. I think it's a worthy goal. Let me never back down from not speaking truth. I pray for courage for all my younger friends here and my mature friends here to step out of wherever they are. That if they don't know Christ, that they would take that bold step and invite you into their lives, Lord. If they're on the sidelines, that you would give them the courage to step out and walk to the middle of the street, but just not to stand there, but to look for somebody to serve and somebody to bless and somebody to minister to. Have your way with us, Father. We are so blessed by all that you've given us and all that you've done on our behalf. We love you. Bless now in Christ's name. Amen.